What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the Sports Talk on Tap podcast. We're here. You can find daily videos Monday through Friday covering all the four major sports leagues, NBA, NHL, MLB, or NFL, whether it be news, highlights, games, all that fun stuff. And in today's NBA episode, it's only fair if we talk about the biggest move that happened overnight or really early this morning. Paul George is now heading to Philadelphia to team up with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, who also, shout out Tyrese Maxey, a little bit ago, got his rookie max extension, 5-year, $200-something million. So they officially have the big three. This was a 4-year, $212 million, so pretty expensive, over $50 million a year. Nick, you said you had a hot take. I'm curious where it goes, but in my opinion, Philly now gets their big three. Everyone's trying to chase Boston. We've seen how aggressive New York's been, trading Mikal Bridges, re-signing OG Anunoby, kind of building around Jalen Brunson. That team, they look like a top 2 team. I think this move, Philly was the 7th seed this year, but with the Embiid injury the second half of the year, that kind of lagged them to that finish line. I think regular season-wise, I think this team is going to be good. I think it's going to be like a top 4 seed. But the question marks for me still remain the same. Will this be enough firepower to take down a team like Boston? Because Joel Embiid has had his shortcomings in the postseason. The Knicks series was arguably his best of the playoffs, but that still came, with fourth quarter deficiencies, inefficient in the fourth. Maybe it was just tiredness. We saw Tyrese Maxey kind of rise to that next level. But Paul George has also been known to be very inconsistent in the playoffs. So I'm very curious kind of where this goes. But it's an interesting move, and I respect Philly for being aggressive. And overall, getting Paul George as the player is an A for this team. But also, it is a huge contract. But they were still able to retain Kelly Oubre, who was a big part of them being really good last year and them being able to even make the playoffs with Joel Embiid out, because he was arguably Philadelphia's second best player with Joel Embiid out, and he was just kind of a crucial piece that you also get to keep. And they were also, they also they're going to lose Nick Batum, but, you'll kind of take that, with, the awareness that, you still get Andre Drummond back as a good backup center, 2 years, $10 million. So Philly has been very aggressive. They had the money to be aggressive, and I respect it. They're going big game hunting. They get one of the best players. It's not even a sign and trade, I believe, like a lot of people speculated. So the Clippers get nothing in return. And we'll talk about the Clippers side maybe either today or a different day. But they obviously lose one of their key guys in this, as someone tweeted, officially cements that Paul George trade is just a huge L for the Clippers and a huge dub for OKC. So overall, even though it's a lot of money, I like it. I'd go like a solid B if I had to grade the acquisition, just because I really do think, this puts them as arguably the second or third best team in the East. I'd probably go third because I still like New York at 2 and Boston until they're dethroned 1. So, that's kind of where I'm at. I respect the big game hunting move from Philly. They get one of the, premier 3-point shooters, still plays solid defense, maybe not like it was a couple of years ago, but he's a really solid contributor and a great third piece, to Tyrese and Joel Embiid. I'm not worried about fit there just because he can shoot the ball, and, it's that Tobias Harris money you get to use somewhere else. So respect that.
Mm-hmm. I'll start off with my grade before, I do the whole hot take thing. I'd grade it like a B or a B minus. Maybe
okay, so around where I had.
I'm not sure though if this is the move that I think Philly should have made. I know he was like, the sought after guy for them. I know they were like, it was rumored for weeks that, he was like wanted or not wanted to go to Philly. Philly wanted him. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was going to say, though, that maybe one of the problems, is this is kind of one of the weaker free agency classes. And Paul George was really the only guy, because then number 2 is Klay Thompson, which is no thank you.
Yeah, I know like Klay is, or not Klay, LeBron is like calling Klay and stuff like that.
Yeah, maybe Philly feel like they had to make this move just because Embiid is already 30. You don't want to waste another one of his years, so you go get the best free agent available. But yeah, like you said, maybe, you don't know if this was quite the move to make, but like one of those maybe you had to make it moves.
Yeah, I think Paul George benefited hugely from this weak free agent class because, like, in negotiation talks, he can say, like, me compared to the rest of these guys you're gonna get, like, I'm far and away the best guy. So, like, give me my money. He obviously got his money, so, like, shout out to him. But the hot take I was really gonna come in with is that, I mean, maybe you'll agree with me. I don't know. Probably not, and I could be, talking crazy here, but I think Paul George is one of the most overrated players, like, of our, I would say, like, this time period. Like, I was kind of just looking over his stats the other night, just like to refresh whether this is like a real solid take and if I really believe in it or not, especially with the money he got. I was like, okay, like, let me check and see, like, if I'm just tweaking or something. Aside from, his 2018 year in OKC where he averaged like 28 a game, and
I felt like that year was so underrated because it was like his second
he
year.
finished third in
OKC.
MVP voting that year.
Yeah.
But other than that year, he had never averaged over 25 points a game in his career. He's a career, I think it's like just over 20 points a game, like 20.2. I was just, checking all his stats. What did he average last year? Like 22 a game with the Clippers. And I know they have, James Harden and Kawhi. So it's like you got to spread the ball around. But I do not think he is worth 200. He's never been to a finals. And I mean, that's not all his fault just because he had to go through LeBron for so many years with the Pacers. But like, I don't know. I think that OKC year really, like, because we saw the trade the Clippers made for him. They traded away 5 first-round picks, 2 first-round pick swaps, Danilo Gallinari, and then a future MVP candidate in Shea, who, when you look back at this trade, Shea is the better player. Like, the Thunder got the better player overall. Like, I know at the time Shea was like young and Paul George was just coming off that MVP caliber year. So it's obviously easy to say in hindsight, but even at that time, like, I don't know if you like, I think the Clippers really screwed themselves with that trade. And now the Thunder are looking like the team of the future with all their first round picks. They're young guys. They have Shea. So that was my hot take, is just, I think
I'm not denying
extremely over. I won't say extremely, but I think
definitely
he's
agree
overrated
with part of it. I do think that trade is going to be a huge L because, like you said, SGA is just the better player straight up as of now. But like you said, though, at the time, the Clippers went big game hunting. They just signed Kawhi. They're trying to form, the next team to beat. And they ultimately fell short a couple times, partially due to underperformance, partially due to injuries. But, at the end of the day, you failed.
Did they go to the WCF? I can't remember.
They did. That's when Kawhi was also injured, though. That was their deepest run. And then they lost to the Phoenix Suns in like a 6-game series. That was the closest. I really do think their best year was year 1. They were up 3-1 on the Nuggets in the bubble in the second round and blew it. The Nuggets won 3 in a row to win in 7, and then they got smoked by the Lakers. But everyone was ready for that Lakers-Clippers because they were both the 1 and 2 seed.
Right. Yep.
Everyone in the bubble was like, it's going to be one of these 2 teams coming out. It was almost certified. And then the Clippers kind of choked. It was a weird Kawhi performance because he really underperformed, which kind of no one expected when the team was fully healthy because Kawhi was just coming off a championship with the Raptors. So everyone, even myself, called Kawhi the best player in the world at that time. And so no one really, expected that.
I'm not going to lie to you. I was also, like, after he made that insane run.
It took down that Warriors team with DeMarcus Cousins, KD, Curry, Clay, even though there was injuries along the way. That was one of the best runs I've seen. Just that Philadelphia Game 7 win in the second round, coming back 2-0 from the 1-seeded Bucks. That was an unreal run. So, yeah, we kind of fell for that. But that really was their best year. Regarding the Paul George front, being – I would say, you could argue, in my opinion, he was one of the more disappointing, stars, and I do think it is an overpay. What made Paul George, though, really special was kind of his two-way ability. His defense was otherworldly back in, just a couple of years ago with OKC and in Indiana. I do think, it's not only scoring, which is what made him like special. So yeah, that 28 points a game with the Thunder may have been an outlier, but he's always been consistent, really efficient. And I do think he'll bring, some desperate three-point shooting to this Philadelphia 76ers team that they will need, just because Tobias Harris really, couldn't do anything. And then just even more so, Nicholas Batum, you're relying on different guys to step up. Paul George can kind of just bring it all in one package. But Paul George, yes, has had his shortcomings in the playoffs that kind of have been under-talked about. Like we talked about Kawhi's performance in that 2020 bubble, there was a reason why they called it Pandemic P, because he just wasn't living up to it. Then he responded the next year with a WCF run by himself without Kawhi, and then you're like, okay, here we go. But then again, just this past year, Paul George had some great games, had some clunkers in there too. So against the Mavericks. So I mean, maybe it's a credit to Mavs defense because we've talked about Paul George, James Harden, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards. They all kind of had some clunkers in there. Maybe it was the Mavs defense, but at the end of the day, when you're an experienced vet, there was high expectations for the Clippers coming into this playoffs. And I know once again Kawhi got injured, but you almost got to prepare yourself for that. So it is kind of a little bit disappointing, but I think having him with Tyrese Maxey will just be insane in Joel Embiid, at least for the regular season. But I still come to terms with you have Kelly Oubre, you have Andre Drummond as your backup, but the bench after that, I don't know, because the Celtics, as good as Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid is, I'm probably still taking the Celtics starting lineup over them because Drew Holiday could really, could really tire out Tyrese Maxey and, Jaylen Brown, Paul George, that matchup. Joel Embiid's known to struggle against his father, Al Horford. So, at the end of the day, is this move going to put them over the hump? I need to see it before I believe it because you could argue, Philly has the more top-end talent than Boston, but I like Boston's depth still more, and I like New York's depth still more, even though, both of those teams still have top talent. It's just going to come down to I need to see a healthy playoff run from Joel Embiid and Paul George. I really do like Tyrese Maxey, and I think he performed great in the playoffs. I think he's a dog, but I need to see a healthy Paul George and a healthy Embiid perform in the playoffs before I believe that this team can go to the NBA Finals or anything like that.
Yeah, I was just going to say it. You took the words right out of my mouth. In order for me to call this like a good signing and everything, they need to all be healthy. Because Philly's another team that Paul George is going from a Clippers team where their best player was, always injured in Kawhi to now a Philadelphia team where Joel Embiid is usually, I don't want to say always because, he just won MVP, but he a lot of the times can run into, injury problems. He did all throughout this year and it kind of screwed them. So if they can, stay healthy, I think they'll be a top 4 seed for sure. With how weak the East is, they might be a 3 or a 2, depending on how well the Knicks
I think them and the Knicks are, there, and then Celtics, like I said, I think have the most depth, and they're the defending champs, so you got to give them that respect. But yeah, this pretty much sums up Paul George's playoffs. First 2 games against Dallas, very efficient, 22 points per game each night. Game 3, 7 points, 3 of 11 shooting. Game 4 responds with an 11 of 19, 33 points. Game 5, 4 of 13. Game 6, 6 of 18. So that sums up the Paul. It was very inconsistent.
It sounded like you were reading Jason Tatum's shooting line.
Yeah. I do. Paul George is still one of the most efficient shooters, but playoffs, haven't always been kind to him. So, we got to remember that, when thinking about this, because Philly makes a sign to win a championship. And, regarding health, of course, those are the expectations we got to hold them to as we enter, next season. And then also we have a lot more like miniature signings, we'll get into later on this week, Nick. But we didn't cover.
Want to get into this one. I wanted to get into this
one.
Sure.
Okay. We'll end it with this one because then I think tomorrow I want to talk about the Javonte Murray Pelicans trade.
Yeah.
But with that being said, we'll end it with this signing. Chris Paul to the Spurs. Very interesting. You don't often see a guy that has pretty much done everything in his career but win a ring, go to the last place team in the West. But the Spurs have one of the brightest futures. They ended the league, really, or ended the season really good. And it was capped off with, I believe it was that crazy comeback against the Nuggets that knocked the Nuggets off from the 1 seed. Wembanyama is a special talent. I think Chris Paul, even with his age, I think this is going to be an interesting fit. And I think it shows, the Spurs are going to be coming up. I think, they obviously made that trade with the Timberwolves to acquire future assets. Maybe it's not this offseason. At some point, they're going to make a trade. And this is just a sign where an aging veteran wants to play with Wemby because, that's the kind of talent he can bring. One of the best defenders in the league already. One of the best scorers in the league already, can kind of just do it all. I'm excited to see what this does because him and Chris Paul throwing lobs to Wemby could be a movie. And I think this is just going to be exciting for the Spurs because you know what? Why not? Why not bring Chris Paul? I knew my dream for them was to bring in Kyrie Irving before, the Mavs really got hot and obviously made their way to the finals just because I would have loved to seen that. But I knew they were I had a feeling they were just going to sign a point guard that was on the veteran side just to help Wemby, maybe get him some pick and rolls, someone that's been there before. And Chris Paul's exactly that. And, I know obviously that first tweet kind of sums it up. This duo will go as far as Chris Paul's hamstrings will take them. Chris Paul has been dealing with a lot of injury issues these past couple of years. It just quite hasn't been the same. But, man, we just remember 2 years ago in Phoenix, that dude was a stud and leading the Suns to 64 wins. Mm-hmm. So, overall, even if he can get back somewhat to that form or just, if he's only healthy for 50 games, I'm just very excited to see what this duo can do just because it's interesting, in my opinion. Why not?
I think it's going to be super beneficial for Wemby. Chris
Someone
Paul
to learn from.
Yeah, exactly. And Chris Paul is the guy who's, if you want somebody to just feed Wemby the ball, Chris Paul is your guy. He's going to – don't be surprised if Chris Paul is averaging, 8 or 9 assists a game just because he's lobbing the ball to Wemby half the time. And, also, it kind of helps when, Wemby's 7'4" and can also hit the three-pointer. So, Wemby's going to be broken regardless. But I think this is, I think it's really good signing. I was curious to see if someone like Trae Young would go to the Spurs too because I feel like
that too. Yeah.
Talks of that. But that would probably be a much more expensive. This is
I just don't think the Spurs want it. I don't think you risk – they didn't want to risk their future, all their picks, money for Trae Young, who still has a lot of his own flaws. And, I think you'd have to give up a boatload because we saw what Mikal Bridges went for. I can only imagine what Trae Young would go for, just given his all-star ability on the offensive end. But overall, I thought this was one of the most interesting things to keep an eye on. And I'm very excited just to see Chris Paul obviously getting bought out by the Warriors. Or Wave, and I'm excited. I think Wemby's going to learn a lot.
Up. I think we're you just mentioned, and we'll talk about it tomorrow, the DeJounte Murray trade.
So, and a lot more miniature signings. But overall, this was probably, I would say these were the two biggest moves. Just because no one was expecting Chris Paul to go there, everyone was expecting maybe a Chris Paul contender, but obviously, this was a huge shakeup in a move of, switching teams because obviously, Harden re-signed and a lot of that stuff happened. But, Paul George signing with the Knicks, signing with the Sixers to help boost up the East. And Wemby gets his mentor for the next – and going into year 2. It's only a 1-year deal. But, we'll see how it goes. And I'm very excited. I think the Spurs will take a leap, obviously, because everyone's expecting Wemby to take another leap. And maybe Chris Paul can help him guide him through the season. And, just help be a mentor besides the games officiated by Scott Foster. Because the Chris Paul-Scott Foster beef is very real. But with that being said, free agency just started 6 p.m. last night. The draft was just recently, so a lot of teams, are making moves. Didn't expect a lot more today. But obviously the biggest move, Paul George is off the board, probably something to keep an eye on. Klay Thompson, where does he go? We've heard Magic, LeBron calling him at 6 p.m. right as free agency open. So Lakers, maybe the Clippers. Does he surprise everyone and return to the Warriors? That'd be a 360. But
I
we'll be
wouldn't
here.
be surprised if he goes back, but it would have to be for, pretty cheap.
Yeah, exactly. With that being said, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and we'll catch you tomorrow with more updates and more signings. Peace.